I
I
do.
can. Oh, okay. We'll go with Cram.
By all means. No, you, please.
No, no. Okay.
No.
Sure. Fine.
Please.
Fine.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Listography. Jason, Joe, and Crams are here, and it is King Crimson Week. You voted them through in our prog poll. I was very surprised that they won. I thought for sure that poll was basically our way of signing up to do yes, but yes came in second. King Crimson getting more votes, but I really enjoyed listening to it. We took 2 weeks this time, as opposed to our usual 1 week to do the listening. We had our 2000s recap week. So I've been listening to a lot. I've listened to most of these records at least 3 times, and then have sort of been skipping back through them, listening to them a lot. I had a lot of trouble deciding how to rank them. I really struggled with it, but I guess we'll see in a second how it turned out. How about you guys?
The only album I knew ahead of time was In the Court of the Crimson King. I don't even think I really knew many tracks outside, so this was basically all brand new. But I'm with you. I really loved doing this. This was a great exercise for jumping into a discography pretty much brand new. I really came out with it as a pretty big King Crimson fan now. Not to say I enjoyed every one of their albums. I went through everything twice, but really not the full twice for the ones at the bottom. But yeah, I mean, the big thing coming out of it is I now like King Crimson a lot. Really love Fripp. Big Fripp head now. But I am curious, like Jason said, we definitely thought Yes was going to win this. So I want to know out there, everybody, do you really think King Crimson is better than Yes? Or do you just think that it would make a better listography for us to do? Because I still, as much as I enjoyed doing this King Crimson, prefer Yes by a good bit.
I had some of the same thoughts. I was also surprised that Yes did not walk away with the tournament. I thought it was going to be a huge blowout for Yes. But maybe we've all been just underestimating the popularity of King Crimson. I was pretty much unaware of most of their songs, most of their albums, other than a little bit of Red, a little bit of Lark's Tongue in Aspic, and of course In the Court of the Crimson King, which is great, but I never really explored anything beyond that for some reason. I don't know why. It's another kind of thing like Peter Gabriel's early solo albums and Kate Bush. I just sort of never had a, strong want to explore, even though I love Robert Fripp and his work with Peter Gabriel and a lot of the production stuff he did in the 80s. But I don't know, just sort of another missing piece of my musical experience. King Crimson, never thought about it until they won that poll. Didn't think I was going to have to listen to King Crimson until the final day when we closed the poll. But it was interesting. I liked listening to it. They have a lot of cool tracks. They're definitely different. They're probably the jazziest that I can possibly get and still really like. I don't know. It's another one of those weird bands that have 5 completely different iterations, different lead singers on a whole bunch of albums, different sounds on a whole bunch of albums. So it was fun. It was interesting to go through. So it was a good experience. Thank you to the voters out there for foisting this upon us.
So I should say I knew Court of the Crimson King, Red, Discipline, and I think I've heard Starless and Bible Black before, and that's all I knew. I might have heard Three of a Perfect Pair before too, but I'm not entirely sure. Less than half I was familiar with, I'd say. So who wants to kick it off?
My bottom is going to be The Construction of Light, and this was their 12th album. Yes, 12th album. So this one came out in 2000, and I don't know. I mean, it's okay. It's sort of, it's hard to compare them to anything because they're so unique. But by this time, kind of started sounding like Dream Theater a little bit. Really big, like heavy drums. There's some jazzy noodling on this, But there's just nothing like catchy or memorable really about anything on this. The singing isn't very good, even though it's Adrian Belew, who I got problems with him in general. But by this point, everyone's kind of old and not at the top of their game, and nothing on here stuck at all. So I threw it all the way at the bottom, even below Islands.
Star rating?
That's 2 stars. It's utterly forgettable.
Yeah, I got the same review. 2 stars. It's my number 13. I don't think Island's that bad. But yeah, I really hate the vocals, especially on Prozac Blues. Fractured, not great. Frying Pan has that weird like Americana style vocals, but mixed with like that prog metal kind of vibe. Doesn't work for me at all. I think as like, just to gloss over all of my stars, this is a 1.5 album that goes up to 2, and basically every album gets just a half bump just because of the performances and the playing, which I think are still good on this. But, you know, I don't think there's very good writing or composition on this. Not really until you get to Lark's Tongues Part 4 and Heaven on Earth, or Heaven and Earth. So you pretty much got to dredge through this entire experience till I get some decent stuff. So yeah, I wasn't too impressed with this, but it'll get much, much better. Construction of Light. Side note, just a lot of terrible, weird spelling, and I think on Thrack especially, I'll talk about just like the worst song titles ever. But yeah, 2 stars for the Construction of Light.
All right, so glad to see we all got the bottom one right. It is definitely the Construction of Light. I also have it at 2 stars. And like Cram, I thought about going lower, but it is saved by some interesting guitar interplay between Fripp and Belew. Me and Joe might have issues in this video if he's got issues with Belew, because I am a big Belew fan. I think he's awesome. I probably like him more as a guitar player than Fripp, and he's probably my favorite vocalist they ever had as well. I think he's awesome. That's no slight against Fripp. I like Fripp a lot too. So on Thrack, you have the full 6-piece band. You got 2 bass players, 2 drummers, 2 guitar players. And then on the next record, they pare down the rhythm section to 1 bass player, 1 drummer, and they go with the wrong pair. I mean, you had Bruford and Levin, and it's just not the same without them. I'm sure Trey Gunn and Pat Mastellato, or whatever his name is, are great players. There's not really an issue with their playing, but there's something missing without Levin there. Just the way his bass sounds and the way it fits into a mix and the way it fills the space is just so unique and so different. And that's really missing. The production on this is very shoddy. So much so that they basically redid it, called it the Reconstruction of Light. And yeah, the drums are terrible. They're all pretty much played on an electric kit. And Joe's right. They're going for this like heavier sound here, starting with Thrack, but even more so here. It's kind of like this Tool, Dream Theater, prog, new prog heaviness that just isn't my cup of tea. Not the direction I would have hoped to see them go. So this is easily the weakest for me.
All right, well, I teased it. Islands is my number 12. And I think it's just, it's so jazzy. Like there's no form here. There's no structure. It's pretty much just straight noodly, sort of jammy, jazzy stuff. And maybe it's just because it comes after their original run, just doesn't work for me. I just don't want to listen to any of these. So this is a completely different lineup. This is Fripp, Sinfield, doing the lyrics still, Mel Collins, Ian Wallace, and Boz. This is just sort of like, I don't even know what they were trying for on this one. I guess they just wanted to noodle around for a while, but it just doesn't work for me in any way. So 2 stars, Islands. Just
all right. A couple of 2 stars on the same wavelength as All the Right Reasons by Nickelback for Joe. We've got my number 12 is 3 is a perfect pair. I'm bumping it up to 2.5 stars. I think it's decent. It's okay. I do think it's not what I want. I'm okay with some of the heavier proggy stuff that they do later on when they do it well. This one is just kind of stuck in between. I feel like at times it's just like weird, straightforward, odd art pop, but it's not nearly as interesting when they do that at their peak. The fusion isn't really there. Like you don't have the contrasting weird gel of sporadic bass parts filling in the gaps and Buford on just wrecking the snare drum. And there's like just contrast in the composition's just not there. They're playing with some like industrial ambience here, but nothing really sticks with me. I do kind of like Nuages, I think it's called, the instrumental, kind of cool. I like some of the pieces in some of these tracks, as always. I mean, they're always interesting parts in every album, but overall, straight, from beginning to end, it's not a great listen. So 2.5, 3 is a perfect pair.
My number 12 is The Power to Believe. I've got it at 2 stars also. I think it sounds a little bit better than Construction of Light because it's got actual drums on it, but that's about the only improvement. They're still doing this kind of like big, heavy prog metal almost kind of sound. It's got a really big fat low end on it and the kind of glitchy drums in spots, programmed drums in spots, these like pseudo industrial sound effects, and just not my taste in what I want King Crimson to be at all. So sounds a little bit better than the one before it, but musically it's about equal. So number 12.
Here's our first controversial pick by me, of course. Number 11, I have Discipline. And this album is really just not good. The aping of David Byrne by Adrian Belew on Elephant Talk is so flagrant. Like, dude should have just straight up sued him. I hate that style of vocal, for one thing. And the fact that Belew makes it even more annoying, just his enunciation of stuff like brouhaha and ballyhoo when he's talking about all that stupid, like, synonyms for talking. My least favorite track of all of King Crimson's. It's so terrible, and nothing else is good either. I don't understand why anyone would like this album. Saved basically just by side B because it's instrumentals, Sheltering Sky and Discipline, and Thilahan Ginjit, decent, but I really dislike the first half of this. It's 2 stars for me, and really I was kind of looking forward to this one on my first listen through. I was like, oh, this one has good reviews. It's a new sound. But I didn't realize it was just the Talking Heads with, slightly better progressive playing. And just did not work for me in the least.
Oof, all right. Did kind of see that coming because it is very Talking Heads-ish, especially the Talking Heads albums you don't really care for. So all right, my number 11, and for everyone that was worried that we were not going to like prog or King Crimson, we're at 11, and I'm already in good star territory with 3 stars for this one, which means I think it's good, just good, not very good. I've got Thrack, which the first time I went around, I had maybe at the bottom of my list. I did not like, but the second time I listened to it, thought it was just nice and pretty hard, pretty cool. It's got a 90s hard grunge sound, industrial. I'm not crazy about the guitar tone on here. I don't really know if it suits the playing the most. And at times on this album, the vocals don't match really. Sometimes kind of like stiff and murky on this album. But there are a couple of songs on it that I just really, really like. Not quite making my top 10. And as always, there's just really good playing on it. So with Baboom, there's just like really cool like drum solo type thing on it. I like Walking on Air, which is kind of a little softer, and I just think it's just kind of nice and heavy, like Jason said, starting to get more towards like the prog metal stuff, and I just enjoy listening to it. People was a cool song too. 3 stars. Number 11, Thrack, whatever that means.
My number 11 is also Thrack, and it's also at 3 stars, although my 3 stars just means okay, not really good. They've got a 6-piece band on this, and apparently there's some kind of concept where it kind of like all starts in the center of the mix, and then they pan one guitarist on each side, one bass player on each side, one drummer on each side. It's all right. David Bottrell produced it. He did some like big sounding rock records in the 90s. I know he did Diorama by Silverchair, which I like, but he's got that really big full sound. And I don't think it works that well for King Crimson. I don't know, but there are songs on this that I like. I like Dinosaur a lot. I like Walking on Air. So it's got some highlights where the two below it don't really have those standout tracks. So put it ahead of those. Not a bad record, just probably won't revisit it.
My number 10, Thrack. So we're all kind of in agreement on that. That's nice to see. I agree with what you guys said. It's fine. It's a super 90s like production though, which I don't love. I don't love the constant instrumentals kind of breaking up everything. I do think there are some cool songs. I like Dinosaur and Sex, Sleep, Eat, Drink, Dream. But I think a lot of it's sort of lost in all those instrumentals they do. I mean, the concept of having 6 people and like 2 guitarists, 2 bassists, 2 drummers sounds cool, but it also sounds like there's things that like never actually work out in practice. But I think this is a good example of just maybe going a little too far in the kind of experimental, let's try something new and cool, and probably just should have written better songs. So 2.5 for me for Thrack, my number 10.
My number 10 is Islands. I've got it at 3 stars. I like kind of the way it moves, and I like kind of how it's laid back. And like Joe was saying, he didn't really like how jazzy it was and just kind of very free form and improv and sporadic and full of noodling, not just the guitar. But the thing that kind of stops it from getting into the upper echelon stuff is it seems like they're going more for vibe than composition here. And their strength usually is to focus on the composition and the playing, which subsequently will create a vibe for the album that they're doing. I think they just kind of, their focus was wrong on here, and it could have been a much better album. And I think at times it just has some dull moments, but overall, I think it's still pretty good. I think it sounds good. I think it's got a really nice kind of just relaxed, jazzy atmosphere to it. But yeah, the songwriting needs to be just a lot better for it to get in my top King Crimson stuff, but I enjoyed it. 3 stars. Number 10, Islands.
My number 10 is 3 of a Perfect Pair, 1984. Still at 3 stars for this one. This album starts out awesome. I love the first few tunes, and listening to it, I had it penciled in the upper echelon. Maybe it might have been my favorite, thinking it was heading in that direction. And then I was totally unaware of the left side, right side concept of this record, where the first half is like all the poppy stuff, and then the second half just goes completely like free form improvisation. And yeah, totally lost me on the second half. I mean, the first half, it's like this perfect balance of their progginess and their Talking Heads artiness with some poppiness as well, and 80s production. Thought it was really great, right up there with the best stuff from Discipline. And then, yeah, from this lineup, the experimental improvisational jams just aren't working. So it falls down to 10, but there's definitely some tracks on here that I love.
You hate separated ideals in albums. You just hate it.
Yeah, really hate it. Although in this case, I don't think I'd even like it if it was like sequenced and mixed up. I just want to hear this lineup in the 80s. I just want to hear their Talking Heads impression, and I'm cool with that sounding like the Talking Heads. I think they do it well, but not really into them doing these long jams that don't go anywhere.
My number 9 is going to be The Power to Believe. I think it's definitely better than The Construction of Light or Thrack. It still kind of has that giant low end, metal prog sort of Dream Theater kind of wanting to be sound. But I like that sound. And I think the songs are just a lot more memorable here. I think the instrumentals are all pretty good. It's just a little catchier. I think it's better production than The Construction of Light. I don't know. The singing, again, Baloo, not great. Although I think I like this Baloo better than his Talking Heads ripoff impressionism. So, I mean, it's fine. It's 3 stars. There's nothing great here, but I liked listening to it. It just doesn't, I don't think I'd ever listen to it again because there's just nothing there that I haven't heard before better done by someone else?
Well, yeah, I'm kind of with Joe. Blue isn't my favorite singer. That would be Greg Lake. That's the best. It's the only time where the vocals really catch me at all. But I'm with Joe. My number 9 is also The Power to Believe, which I was surprised that I liked as much as I did after reading kind of reviews going into it, what it was supposed to be. And I'm giving it 3 stars, kind of close to 3.5, but not quite. I like how heavy it is. I like that it's kind of all in on that prog metal, very powerful, very violent and mean at times, dire and fearful. Love the album cover. I love it. I think it's really cool. And it's interesting. Some of the things that I like about the album also hurt it simultaneously. I really like the balance and the momentum of doing some of like the slower, softer stuff. Just really helps the momentum, like Eyes Wide Open, I believe, and Power to Believe Part 2. I like how they operate the album, but they're objectively like my least favorite songs on it. So kind of a give or take there. But overall, I think it's a good album. 3 stars for me at number 9, Power to Believe.
My number 9, this might be a little controversial. I think this one is fairly well regarded among King Crimson fans, but I've got Lark's Tongues and Aspic at 3.5 stars. This is the new lineup of the band: Fripp, Wetton, Bruford, David Cross, Jamie Muir. This is them going for like a more freeform, improvisational jazz influenced by Eastern European classical music. Bartok in particular was cited as a big influence, and I don't know, I just don't really dig the direction on this in general. Not really crazy about the heavy use of the violin on it. I do like Book of Saturday and Exiles, which come after the opening track, the title track. I mean, listening to that title track, it's like this very dense piece of music. And then you get to these 2 songs that are much lighter and melodic. And then the last part of the record is practically all instrumental. It doesn't flow that well. I don't know. Maybe I need to listen to it more, but didn't really connect with me in any kind of significant way. And a couple of the other albums really felt like I kept being drawn back to them, and this one, not so much.
Number 8. We're on to number 8 already. Time's just flying by here. We got Beat. I think it's a step up for sure from Discipline, even though Blue's sort of still imitating a little bit. Like, it's not like a blatant ripoff. It's now sort of an homage. And I think the art rock touches that come through are more interesting. It's still got like that. Okay, so it still has the Afro beat, sort of Remain in Light. I get a lot of Remain in Light on these 3 albums, sort of in the middle of the 80s, Talking Heads with Blue. But I think this one just has better, less annoying songs than Discipline did. And again, the Blue and the David Byrne imitation, a little more tolerable here. I don't like that Fripp is sort of pushed to the back. I don't really understand why he would want to bring in someone like Blue who sings, plays guitar, writes, the music with them, but it seems like it's just too much Blue on these 80s albums, not enough Fripp. I do love Tony Levin. I love Bill Bruford. So the rhythm section is fantastic and some really cool bass parts by Levin on this. I think he's better on this than he ever was on Discipline. So it's 3 stars. It's good, but it's still, I don't know, coming after all those great King Crimson albums, the beginning and then the Wetton vocal stuff with Red and Stardust and Blah Blah Black. Like, this just always feels like a letdown to me. And I think that's maybe why I judge it a little harshly, but it's just not the King Crimson I want. So 3 stars for Beat. It's fine, but it's not my cup of tea.
My number 8 is also Beat, but I like it a lot more. I think it's very good, almost great. 3.5 stars for me. Yeah, the Talking Head stuff is getting a little out of control at times. I was a little worried because the first song in the album, Neil and Jack and Me, I don't really care for, but everything else I really liked. The guitar is still there. Joe's right. It's not the star of the show, really. The rhythm section is. And I think there's a lot of really good keys on this album. Very danceable. Not too crazy about the guitar tones on this. I think it's a little too overblown 80s, getting like 80s Clapton vibes at times. But yeah, Santori and Tangier is really cool. Waiting Man is cool. Not just David Byrne with the vocals here, but also kind of like some Sting in there, especially like on Waiting Man. I think Neurotica is cool. I like it all a lot. 3.5 stars. My number 8, Beat.
All right. More controversy, maybe, from me. At number 8, I've got Starless and Bible Black. 3.5 stars. It opens with some great songs. Great Deceiver, just a killer riff to open the record. Great song. Lament is really cool with a really nice melody. And then the rest of the record just kind of goes off in this more improvisational direction. A lot of it was even recorded live and like kind of blended into part recorded in the studio. I don't know. There's times when they jam and go off in improvisational directions where it really works. But it's like when there's a rhythm section holding something down and someone's improvising over it and there's like direction to it, it's great. There's times on this record where no one knows what they're doing. Everybody's improvising at once and it's just nothing's happening. And then eventually they'll settle into a little bit of a groove that's cool. And you just kind of wish that they had turned that little piece into a full song. And there's just not really that much payoff here. And I don't know, this is maybe going to get me in a lot of trouble. I don't know really how I feel about John Wetton as a bass player. There's a lot of times where I feel like he's not in the pocket and he's like a little behind, where he'll like kind of like play sloppily. His fingers will sound like they're getting stuck on the strings and he's just like a millisecond behind where he should be. I don't know. And that, I think that is especially the case on this record. So I don't know. 3.5 stars. I still like it. I still think it's pretty good, but I do have issues with it. Keeping it out of that 4-star range.
Well, it's interesting. I do not feel the same way about his bass playing. I don't know. I don't feel like that is possible, that they would allow that unless that was part of the sort of overall vision and sound of the band for how kind of detailed and everything they were. I don't know. Who knows? I'll have to actually listen for that next time and see if I agree with you. My 7, my favorite of the Talking Heads ripoff trilogy, 3 of a Perfect Pair. And finally, sort of the Burn impressions dissipate for the most part. Still sort of annoyingly there, but I really didn't notice it. If I'd started with this one, I may have just sort of, it kind of sounds like David Byrne instead of like really thinking he's aping him. You know, it's kind of a cool new wave, the first half. I agree with Jason somewhat. Side 1 is great. It's really great. My favorite of all every single one of these tracks is my favorite of their 80s stuff. 3 of a Perfect Pair, Model Man, Sleepless, Man with Open Heart. I think they're all great. It does fade out a little bit at the end with side 2. A little jammy, a little jazzy, but I don't mind that nearly as much as Jason does because I'm not in love with the new wave Talking Head sound anyway. And I don't mind that it's sort of split into 2 sides either. It probably would be better if they'd kind of space it out a little bit so you get those, 3 of a Perfect Pair and Model Man are practically pop songs. They might be the closest to pop that these guys ever got, and they're great. And yeah, maybe this is a candidate for rearranger or something in the future. But I think it's pretty good, and I think the playing's all great. I think Tony Levin's fantastic on this. Still need a little more Fripp. Just got to turn the Fripp up a little bit. But other than that, it's a pretty solid record. We go 3.5 for 3 of a Perfect Pair.
All right, my number 7 at 3.5 stars, and I really like and eventually will love all of these 7 albums here to come. So I feel like no matter what, there's going to be some controversy. I had this one floating around as high as 4. I just really like a lot of these albums, so I'm not sure how much people will get upset by this. Probably a lot. You guys haven't mentioned it yet. It's going to be Red. 3.5. It's really good. It's heavier, especially right off the bat with the title track. Fripp is great on this. Love the weird snare sound on One More Red Nightmare, but there's some like instrumental choices I don't like on this album. Like on that same song, One More Red Nightmare, I don't like the brass horns on it. Kind of takes me out of it. I don't think it fits. And I think the main thing is I could have used just a little more percussion and bass on this, but overall, I really like it. Not crazy about how every song gets longer and longer and longer. I think it weighs the album down a little bit, but those are pretty narrow complaints, to be honest. I still think it's really good. 3.5 stars for Red.
You're gonna hear about that one. I thought your red shirt meant it was gonna be at number 1.
This is a crimson shirt, and I was gonna wear a crown too, but
So I've already kind of showed that I'm not the biggest fan of that era, but I'm not going there yet. Not going to Red for a while. My number 7 is Beat, staying at 3.5 stars. To me, this record, I like it. I think a lot of the tracks are really cool, but it's just kind of like watered down version of Discipline. A little more poppy, sort of less interesting guitar stuff happening, which I think is like the real highlight on Discipline. So it just loses kind of something. A little bit of a watered down repeat of the record before it, but I like Neil and Jack and Me a lot, and I like Waiting Man, I think is great. I'd like to hear them do more interesting stuff instrumentally, and it seems like they're shifting a little bit towards being more song oriented, which usually is what I want, but with Fripp and Ballou, just give me all the guitars.
All right, moving on to number 6. Now, this is close to classic King Crimson territory. Number 6 is Lizard, and I like this album. I really like Circus, the opening track. I really like Lizard, the closing 23.5-minute epic. But I think what holds it back, this is another one where they had a change in vocalist. They bring on Gordon Haskell to play bass and vocals, replacing Craig Lake, who went off to join Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And I think it's just such a big step down. He kind of has like a quiet voice, and it just doesn't add anything to the band. The bass, I don't really recall hearing too much or noticing it at all during the listen. That being said, Circus is great. I like the psychedelic sort of flavor to it. There's a little jazzy, there's more jazz kind of creeping in every album. Still have that great Mellotron. Just give me more Mellotron. Love that Mellotron. Indoor Games, Happy Family, Lady of the Dancing Water, sort of forgettable. So really it's just the 2 tracks, Circus and Lizard, that are strong, and Gordon Haskell just brings it down a tad bit. So it's close to the classics, but it's still at 3.5 stars for me.
My number 6 at 3.5 stars. I've got Starless in the Bible Black. Like it a lot. It's maybe I want it a little more chaotic. I think it's a little less frantic at times, especially in the middle. It gets kind of slow, but I think Fracture is really awesome. The Mincer is great. Yeah, overall, there's just too many sterile moments for me. I think Bruford is really good on this album when he gets cut loose. But like with the Night Watch, we'll let you know, kind of right in the middle, up until the Mincer. That chunk just kind of takes me out of it. But other than that, I still like parts of that, but kind of brings it down. But overall, I think it's really good. Everyone's kind of shining here. When they can, they just need to like turn it up. We just need more of what's good in this album. Just turn it up more. But 3.5 stars. Number 6, Starless and Bible Black.
All right, my number 6 is Discipline. I'm up to 4 stars here, and these top 6 I struggled with placing and ordering them. I had this as high as 2 at one point. Every time I listened to it, I'd want to move it up, and then I'd go back and listen to the older stuff, and I'd be like, no, it can't be as high as those. So I'd move it back down, and just back and forth every time. But this is where it lands. I love kind of the grooves that they build on this, these kind of like circular rhythmic things they do on the guitar. The drums on it and bass on it are great. Tony Levin's amazing. I think Ballou's awesome on it as a vocalist. I think he's really charismatic. He sounds a lot like David Byrne, but So what? He played with Talking Heads. He gets a pass. I think his guitar playing is awesome on it. I think he's a fantastic guitar player. I think he carries the record, basically. Baloo puts it on his back, and just, I think his vocal delivery is really entertaining and engaging on it. So I don't know what Joe's talking about. Really cool, really good. Maybe could consider it for my 81 list, since I think 81 is such a weak year, but I still don't think it would probably make my top 5, but it might be close.
Whatever. I don't get it. I don't get the Baloo appeal. I never will. Back to my list, number 5, top 5 here. Going with Larks' Tongues and Aspic. Great album name. Gotta love that album name. They have a lot of cool album names, actually, but Larks' Tongues and Aspic is one of my favorites. Jason had this one super low, and it is jazzy. A lot of sort of improvisational stuff. But I really like John Wetton coming on. I like the electric violin and whatever that David Cross is playing. And I think Bill Bruford just rocks. I think he's a phenomenal drummer. I like both of the Larks' Tongues and Aspic Part 1 and 2. I think Part 2 is even better than Part 1. Just really kind of cool, heavy sounding. I like Easy Money. Kind of sounds like Pink Floyd almost, but this is before like Pink Floyd adopted that sound. Really like the electric violin, a little psychedelic feel to it. And then the talking drum has that like thick Latin flavored guitar. When I was listening to it, I was like, is this Mars Volta? Like, you can hear so many like people that came after who stole like little aspects of this album. So it was really fun to listen to and like pick out, okay, like that's where they got that guitar sound. So I thought that was very cool. And it's just a really cool album. I don't know. There's only 6 songs. It's very spacey at times, but they're just really moments of just like awesome, just like mind-blowing instrumental work on it. And I think Wetton's big step up over whoever they had before, Boz and Haskell, who they had after Greg Lake. So I think they kind of found their vocalist again. I think he really matches King Crimson's style. I love his work in Asia as well. So 4 stars. We're in 4-star territory here with Larks' Tongues and Aspic.
All right. So my number 5, I'm still at 3.5 stars. I've got In the Wake of Poseidon. I love this early era. It's more psychedelic, mellotrons, and it's got like that fairy tale wonderland kind of quality to it that was of the late 60s into the early 70s. This whole thing has been hard for me to talk about. Probably I've realized I've been talking less than I usually do because it's just hard for me to put my finger on. Like, there's 13 albums, but there's really just like 4 albums in a way. Like, there's just like 4 different eras that all kind of sound the same. And sometimes we kind of talk about this where an album sounds and is very much like the one before it, just kind of feels like leftovers and not quite as good. That's how I feel about this one. It's not as good as In the Court of the Crimson King. It's a little different. You know, it's a little peppier, I think. You get some horns in there, a little more classic jazz influence. And I just don't think it has the obvious standouts that the debut has, but I still think it's really good. 3.5 stars In the Wake of Poseidon.
It just keeps getting harder and harder to place these. These top 5 are so close to interchangeable. 4 stars again for me. I've got Lizard at number 5. You've got a new rhythm section here, new singer. Gordon Haskell, he sings one song on The Wake of Poseidon. He sings Cadence and Cascade, and he sounds so good on it, I think. It's one of the highlights of that record. His voice is really soft and kind of high, and it works perfectly with that song. And then on this record, he kind of tries to sound more like Greg Lake, I feel, or the songs themselves just kind of force him into that sort of lower register and just doesn't sound quite as good as Greg Lake. But having said that, I do think his bass playing is pretty good. There's some really good melodic pieces of playing that he does, especially on the title track. And I think Andy McCulloch is a really good drummer. I think the drumming is a step up on this record. There's some great sax on it on Circus. So I like it a lot. The John Anderson guest appearance is fantastic on the title track. He sounds so good. Like Joe said, Circus is great. I don't think there's any like really moments on this record that I don't like, which some of the other records that I have ahead of it that do have tracks that I don't really care for. So it's pretty consistent, but I think they just need that singer to put it over the top.
Well, I agree with Jason that these 5, really for me, it's 6. Like the 6 classic King Crimson albums, with Lizard on up to my number 4, Starless and Bible Black. Same personnel as Larks' Tongues and Aspic, with John Wetton, Bill Bruford, David Cross. So you kind of get that little extra, that electric violin peeking in. Still have the mellotron though. Still kind of the jazziness, experimental nature of Larks' Tongue and Aspic. I know this is higher by, Larks' Tongue was 5. This is 4. They're so close. Like they're basically 2 sides of the same coin. I think I just had this one a little bit higher because The Great Deceiver, Lament, awesome. Those are the studio tracks. Everything else they recorded sort of mixed with the live performances. So you have a little bit more of the improvisational stuff. And I don't always love the long jams, but I think Fracture and the title track, Stars and Bible Black, are really great. I think the Night Watch builds into this really awesome, with those really cool harmonics that Fripp's working with. It's real like spacey sounding, really cool. Fripp solo, one of my favorite of his solos. It's not quite as heavy as Red, and it's a little looser than Larks' Tongues and Aspic. I think it's just sort of the presence of The Great Deceiver and Lament as this almost pop songs kind of just elevates it a little bit above Larks' Tongues. I love when bands like King Crimson, the big prog, they can do a 15-minute track, but when they kind of narrow their focus and write like a convincing pop song, I think it almost always works. And I think they nail it on the first 2 tracks on this one. And that's why I have it like 0.1% higher than Larks' Tongue, but another 4-star album for me.
All right, my number 4, and I am also in 4-star territory now. I've got Lizard. I think it's absolutely great. Really like the keys and the woodwinds here. It's almost got like a trippy fairy tale feel, very majestic jazz quality, really unique. That's probably my favorite thing about these top albums. Like, it doesn't sound like any other album you've ever heard. It's just got such a cool tapestry of styles and influences. This one's kind of like more sharp and less chaotic up till here. Love Lizard as an epic closer. I mean, I'm with you guys. It's kind of just like a grab bag for the long, like improvisational jams. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. This one seems like it's just completely written as, musical piece. And I think when they really take the time to do that, it's even better. It can be very pretty at times, this album. Everything kind of like has slightly more jazz to me than it before. I love like that really like vicious trumpet that comes in towards the end of Lizard. Yeah, I think this is great. And obviously Circus and Lizard are the best tracks on it, but Indoor Games, Happy Family, Lady of the Dancing Water, they're fine. If that were the anchor of the album, that wouldn't be very good, but it doesn't weigh it down at all. So this is a very healthy 4-star album that I really like. I think it's great. Lizard.
All right, nitty gritty now. My number 4, again, another 4-star album. I've got In the Court of the Crimson King, the debut, and it's really like splitting hairs with these records. They're all so close to the same amount, like same quality to me. So you got to kind of get nitpicky. I don't think I like 21st Century Schizoid Man as much as most people. It's cool. I get why it's like a big song of theirs and why it was an important track in the history of heavy music and in the history of prog, but I don't know. It's not one of my favorite tracks of theirs. For me, the highlights of this record are the next 2 tracks, I Talk to the Wind and Epitaph, which I think are both great. And then it kind of plagues them on a lot of their records. They just can't seem to go from front to back without like a section or a song that I just don't like. And on this record, it's the second half of Moonchild where it kind of devolves into like this, I don't know, percussion, ambient thing, and it just totally loses me, takes me out of it. I get bored, but it's still really great. Most of the record is awesome. 4 stars. I just think the 3 I have ahead of it, I think, are a little more consistent.
Well, I can kind of see where you're coming from, because they do always have like that one track. Like, it's every freaking album. There's just like one, like 5-6 minutes where it's just like, could you just chop that, just cut that, and you're perfect. And I thought about putting my number 3 ahead of that one, but couldn't do it. I got In the Wake of Poseidon is my number 3. This is super tough because I don't know, it might be better than In the Court of the Crimson King, but it kind of suffers because it's very similar to In the Court of the Crimson King. Even like Pictures of a City, kind of 21st century Schizoid Man. In the Wake of Poseidon's like really close to In the Court of the Crimson King. It's so close though. This is 4.5 star territory for me. So we're up in the top 10, 15 of the year. I think the one that sort of holds it back, I'm not as crazy about Cadence and Cascade as you guys are. The sort of quietness of Gordon Haskell. I think Greg Lake can do quiet. I don't know why they wouldn't just use him again. He does quiet on, In the Court of the Crimson King. Like, he can do quiet. I don't see why they brought in Haskell or whatever his name is for this one. That's really the only low point. I think Cat Food's really good. It's weird. It's got like this jazzy, like really kind of almost funny, like completely outside of what they had done before. So really kind of grabs you as soon as it comes on. It's like, where did this come from? This doesn't seem like to be on a King Crimson album, but it's great. It works. Devil's Triangle's pretty cool instrumental, not my favorite of their sort of longer instrumental jams, but I think it works. All in all, there's really very little to complain about or nitpick on this album. I think if In the Court of the Crimson King didn't exist, this would be a 5-star album and a lot sort of more well-known, because I really didn't hear about it. I've never really heard about it. I didn't know it existed until we started listening to these, and I don't know why it's sort of not considered one of the classics of the genre, in my opinion, because it just rules. It's just not quite In the Court of the Crimson King territory.
My number 3 is going to be Discipline. 4.5 stars. Yeah, I love it. David Byrne impression? You betcha. Does it bother me? Not really, because it's just great. It's a really cool blend of a lot of things: art, pop, jazz, new wave. It's just so weird and creative and unusual and fluid and sharp. And Levin and Bruford is the best combo for the pocket, no doubt. I love the percussion and the bass on here. The precision of Fripp's playing with everyone else is awesome in this. And it's just a lot of really cool little details. It's very danceable. It's upbeat. It's very wild and just freeing to like, it's just like a big mind bender. Love it. It's like 80s acid jazz almost. It's very cool. Not acid jazz, the genre, but like, let's do acid and listen to jazz. Yeah, I just totally dig it. And I also think it's probably my favorite production of any of theirs. I think it sounds great. The bass just sounds awesome. It's candy to my ears. Joe, you mad dude, you're insane. 4.5 for Discipline. This was tough. I really wanted it number 1, but really had to be like focused and a little bit more objectionable. But I really had a lot of fun with this album.
All right, my number 3 is In the Wake of Poseidon, still at 4 stars. I think on this record, The Devil's Triangle is the track for me that kind of I don't like that much, but it comes at the end, so it doesn't really disrupt the rest of the record. And I think it's just a little bit, ever so slightly more consistent than Court of the Crimson King. And the two highlights on this record for me are Cadence and Cascade and Cat Food. And I like those 2 tracks probably more than anything on Court of the Crimson King. So that's kind of was my thinking in elevating it ahead of it in the ranking. Still a 4-star record, really good. I think all the playing on it is solid. The writing is good. Cool record. I agree. It should be more well known. I don't know why it doesn't really get talked about as much. Really, none of the 3 records after Court of the Crimson King do. You kind of hear about Court of the Crimson King, and then you kind of hear about the next era with Wettin and stuff, and all that other stuff in between kind of gets lost for some reason. But I think they're all really good records. 4 stars. Number 3.
My number 2, 4.5 stars. Great album. Really, it's kind of mind-blowing that it came out in 1974. If you just listen to it today, you're like, okay, this album must have come out in like, I don't know, 78, 79, 85. Like, there's metal, proto-metal stuff on here that just blew my mind when I heard it. Of course, I refer to Red, in 1974. It's just amazing album. What they did on this one kind of blows my mind. The sounds that they got out of it right off the bat with Red instrumental. It's staying close to heavy metal. Like what they're doing, what they're playing, so heavy. It literally sounds like metal. It's metallic sounding. Like it goes beyond just like being proto metal. It literally, sounds like, I don't know, Vikings forging steel or something. Like this, just this really cool kind of aura over this whole album that goes from track to track. Fallen Angel, One More Red Nightmare, Providence, and Starless. And it's just, you still have a little bit of the jazz in there, but it's kind of tempered a little bit. Everything's really propulsive. I think the bass sounds great. I don't know what Jason's talking about. And I think Wettin, great vocalist. I think he sounds really good here on Fallen Angel. It's close to, like, you get hints of like his Asia work 8 years later, kind of peeking in, sort of, you can tell the genesis of like that sound kind of all came from this album. And you can dock it if you hate sort of like cheesy 80s metal, but you can kind of see them all listening to this album, just being like, okay, let's just rip this off. And we got ourselves, a hit. The guitar parts are awesome. I think this is Fripp's best work, most standout. There's some like really cool harmonic driven stuff on here, especially on Fallen Angel. Kind of starts out a little jazzy, a little pretty, and then just devolves into this like clashing metal, hard rock song. And you got some sweet jazzy horns poking through every now and again too. It's just crazy. Like there's sounds on here that aren't out of place in like grunge. Like I was listening to this at one point, I was like, is this like Pearl Jam? Like there's just so far ahead of its time. It blew my mind across the board. Every track rules. 4.5 stars for Red.
I should probably give it another chance. I really liked it, but yeah, again, I love the title track and then nothing else quite lived up, but I do want to revisit it. My number 2 is going to be In the Court of the Crimson King. And you guys have been talking about, they always have that weird transitional track, which kind of is just like a big road bump, or what the hell's the word? Speed bump. That's kind of the problem with prog albums, is if there's something you don't like going through the whole album, you got to sit through it for a long time. And it is half of Moonchild on this, just like Jason said, which takes up 7 minutes of your life. So that's just kind of the problem. It's hard to award that 5 stars when there's a large percentage of the album you're not crazy about. I also am with Jason that I think 21st Century Schizoid Man is slightly overrated. Didn't even consider it for my top 10 songs, to be honest, but I sure as hell considered Talk to the Wind, Epitaph, and Court of the Crimson King. I think this album is great. 4.5 stars. Love all of the pieces here. I love just like this early, softer, more orchestral kind of stylings, the butterfly-esque guitar kind of coming in, really moody blues style of vocals and mellotron, and album's just really sporadic and awesome, memorable. It's also just kind of like, even though the playing can be crazy at times and really intricate, it's very peaceful sounding to me in a weird way. Easily my favorite vocal performance is on this. It's like that pretty psychedelia. Even though I do like the jazzier, more like David Byrne, beat poet-esque kind of weird thing that Joe hates. I like that later, but I really like the vocals here a lot. Yeah, I mean, just a little bit of a hiccup to keep it from 5 stars. My number 1 also is 4.5. You got to get rid of these hiccups in these big prog albums, but still a great listen. 4.5 means really great, really, really great. So nothing to sneeze at. Court of the Crimson King, number 2.
All right. I don't know what my most controversial opinion is in this video. Either Lark's Tongue and Aspic at number 9 or Islands at number 2. I really, really like this album, and I had a wild ride with this album. Starting the first time I went through, I thought every record of the first 4 got worse and worse. So my order was chronological when I went through the first time through the discography. And then every time I listened to it, I liked it more and more. I think it's still growing on me. It's still the one I want to listen to the most. Like if I'm going to listen to it, any King Crimson next week, it'll probably be this record. Got it at 4 stars. I think Boz sounds really good on it, and I like the jazzy aspect of it. I think the horns on it, Mel Collins sax on it sounds fantastic. And all the jamming, there is like a lot of wild kind of exploratory jams, but the rhythm section is always holding down a groove and letting people just kind of solo over top of it. So it doesn't really bother me or, drag on to me. I think it's engaging the whole time, even though it's going in a lot of crazy directions. I like the flute on the opening track. Sailor's Tale is awesome. I love the interplay between Fripp and the sax on that track. Really good. I definitely think it's their least immediate record, and I'm not surprised at all that people rank it kind of low, but I don't know, there's just something about it that I like. I like the sound of it, and I don't know what to say. I'm intrigued by it. Like I said, I still have it at 4 stars, but I feel like this is like, of all the 4 stars, I've got 6 4-star albums from King Crimson. This is the one I feel like could actually maybe, even though I have it at number 2, this may be able to leapfrog up to a 4.5 at some point because I really like it.
Who are you? Islands, the jazziest, most freeform.
I don't think it's that freeform though. The stuff on Lark's Tongue is way more freeform, where they're just kind of all improvising at the same time. This is just kind of like soloing over sections. I don't think it's that freeform.
I would never in a million years. I would have picked every other album, and then if you would have told me I was wrong, I would have picked them all again, and then I would have picked Islands for number. That's weird. That's interesting though. I might have to give it another listen now, since I have it so low. My number 1, clearly, Court of the Crimson King. I got it at 5 stars. It is a masterwork, totally original. Doesn't sound like anything else, really, other than In the Wake of Poseidon, which they also wrote afterwards. But, from the opening vocals, I don't know how you guys don't like 21st Century Schizoid Man. One of my all-time favorite songs. Synthesized, metallic, screaming from Greg Lake. The drums on this album, amazing. Maybe some of my favorite drums of all time. I think Michael Giles rules. I think every moment on this album, as far as drums, just, I don't always notice drums at all, but I love them on this, especially for the time frame, it being 1969 when this came out. Definitely doesn't sound like anything else. It's almost, it's just wild all over the place, but really cool stuff. Greg Lake, he's their best singer by far. I don't think it's even close between him and anyone else, especially Baloo. The way he goes from the hard rock screaming to the Baroque pop of I Talk to the Wind. It's practically Zombies-esque with that big mellotron kind of just engulfing everything. Super pretty. Epitaph, sort of that, it's not a stereotypical prog song, but just the way it kind of builds this sort of apocalyptic imagery. There's a part in it where it kind of goes into like these military almost drums. It sort of just like builds back up. Every moment, I think, of this album, other than, the elephant in the room, is Moonchild. It's a little 12 minutes. That's a long time for sort of Erstaz freeform jazz noodling. But I think the rest of the album is so good that it's like an 11. And it just brings it down like half a point. So you're still in 5-star territory. This is like a 9.6 out of 10. On my Joe Steigerwald 10-point scale, which translates for our purposes into 5 stars. And, the Court of the Crimson King, again, the closer, epic, the way it kind of starts with the chorus and kind of goes off in sort of jazzy directions and always comes back to that one theme. Really magnificent, everything on here. For some reason, for a band, we know that was started and sort of the only member that went through everything was Fripp. We haven't talked about him that much. It's interesting. He really is a master of like blending in. And there was a lot of just sort of arpeggios on this, a lot of pretty playing on acoustic, just sort of in the background almost. He's rarely like at the forefront. Sort of everyone else is working around him. And it works. He's great. I think he has a lot of cool stuff on this album that you don't always notice right off the bat, but you really sort of hone in on it. Really elegant, cool playing. So I think everybody on this album rules. It's a 5-star album, number 1 in the Court of the Crimson King.
Very nice. Yeah, Fripp, like in the Gabriel stuff, has a bit of a different dynamic because he's just like guitar focused almost. This one, he's got a lot more responsibility. It's just like the vision and leader of the artistry here. Good call, but please don't put words in my mouth. I like Schizoid Man. I just said it was a little overrated. My number 1. And I love the way Joe was talking about Red. I feel the same way, but I feel it about Lark's, Tongues, and Aspect. And you said like you listen to like a lot of newer prog metal stuff, Mars Volta, Dream Theater. Yeah, I feel like this is like the bedrock where a lot of that kind of comes from. And it's 73, so way ahead of its time for me. They're not doing anything that other prog rock bands are really doing here. I think Fripp and crew on this are just really fascinating. The way they're just like have this really comprehensive contrast and playing against each other. It's just, you can't like envision it. You can't duplicate it. It's so cool. I think it's rocking at times when it needs to be. The compositions, the way they just have like these scenic tempo changes and like emotional changes and everything. It's very seamless. Hard to put my finger on, but it's like can be very frantic and scatterbrained, but focused at the same time. And this is the only album that I don't think has a like speed bump on. Book of Saturday is a really nice tune. Love the acoustic playing and Exiles. The title track part 1 and part 2 is awesome. Easy Money has some really cool stuff. Talking Drum is great. Yeah, I'm just the rhythm section is gelling with the guitar, doing completely different stuff. It's fusion, like at its best, prog fusion. It's awesome. Yeah, I've got it at 4.5 stars. Probably could get up to 5 with maybe a couple more listens. Maybe it hurts that I'm with Joe as who the best vocalist is. So the lack thereof on this might hurt it a little bit. It's not a vocal album really at all. I really much enjoyed this, and this was tough. Like the top 6 or 7 were tough. Like I think I had Red at number 7, but it could be 3rd maybe. Like it's tough. These were all really good albums, but my number 1's got to be Lark's, Tongues, and Aspect.
All right, my number 1 is Red. I think this lineup finally gets it right after what I think are 2 of the weaker King Crimson records. They pare down to just the 3-piece, and I think they pare down the writing and just kind of simplify things a little bit, and it just all works. Even the instrumental, like the title track, just is really focused and really structured. Fallen Angel has one of the best melodies, I think, in their whole catalog. There's some awesome jamming on it, but it never kind of meanders or gets lost. It's always moving forward, and the ideas are always there. They're never kind of just like grasping for musical ideas. I think it's great. I think Wetton's bass playing on this record is better. I'm not like 100% on it. I still think there's moments where I feel like maybe it's probably just me, but something about it's just slightly off. But yeah, I just think this record is really cool. It's heavy. There's like some awesome, Mel Collins comes back and plays some great sax on it. There's an awesome cornet solo on Fallen Angel. All the horns and other instruments that come in that are outside of the core 3-person group are awesome. It's still only a 4-star record for me though, because of Providence. It's just another one of those tracks, 8 minutes, that doesn't really do much. Everything else on this record is amazing. Might be a 4.5 or 5-star without Providence or something other than Providence in that spot, but still think it's great. I think King Crimson, really, really great band. Lots of 4-star albums. Never quite get up to that high upper echelon for me, but consistently very, very good.
This is the first time we've had 3 separate number 1 winners where I didn't think someone was just like totally off base.
Yeah, it's I think we all have like one kind of, not ultimately controversial, maybe Islands at 2 is the most one, but I think we were around the same ballpark for the main thing. I think I lean a little bit closer to Joe just because of the individuals that we prefer, probably. But still, yeah, I'm so glad we did this, because King Crimson is just like a weird black hole in my upbringing. My dad loved prog, everyone except King Crimson. Like, it was Rush, Emerson, and Palmer, Genesis, Jethro Tull, like you name it. Yes, go on and on. I don't really remember any King Crimson ever, but glad we did it. Know them now, and I would love to get it into my regular listening if Jason never gives me time off from work.
I think as a whole discography, like if I had to just like pick 25 best songs by any prog artist, they'd be right up there. I don't know if they'd be number 1, but they might beat out someone like Yes. Whereas a whole, I think I like Yes better, just because they don't sort of have those Providences and Moonchilds in their repertoire. But some of the songs, are just some of the coolest, most unique songs ever written. So it's tough. It's tough to like compare when you have these albums where you want to really love them and there's just like one thing holding you back. I think as a whole, they got to be up there with Yes, and I guess Genesis as sort of the pinnacle of prog rock in my mind.
I still put Yes and Genesis far above King Crimson, and that's not a knock on King Crimson, but for the things you mentioned, I think that better whole albums, they don't have as many duds, but I also think Yes, if I were to make my top 20 favorite King Crimson and Yes songs playlist, be like 18 Yes songs, maybe 2 King Crimson. Probably the same with Genesis. So.
All right, well, that was our King Crimson listography. Let us know your ranking down in the comments and what you think of King Crimson overall. And we will be back tomorrow with our top 10 favorite King Crimson songs. In the meantime, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, hit the bell for notifications, check the description for links to all of our social media accounts, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.